Judge Thomas Mitchell stood tall behind the mahogany bench, his black robe flowing as he surveyed the courtroom. He had seen it all over the years, from minor disputes to life-altering judgments. But today something felt different, a weight in the air, something that made the case before him feel like more than just another routine decision in his career. The woman who stood before him, Erica James, was composed and confident, but there was something about her demeanor that struck him as defiant, her voice steady, but with an edge that seemed to carry the weight of her struggles. Erica had arrived in the courtroom that day with a sense of purpose. She knew that the case she was about to present was crucial to the future of her business. She had worked tirelessly to build her tech startup from the ground up. Each step forward had been hard-earned and carefully calculated. But now she found herself fighting not just for compensation, but for the very integrity of her work. She had come a long way from the challenges of starting her company as a black woman in a male-dominated industry to facing a lawsuit from a vendor who had failed to meet his obligations. Her nerves were steady, her thoughts sharp, but the courtroom atmosphere was tense. She could feel the judge's gaze on her with every word she spoke, and despite her best efforts to remain calm, she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that his eyes weren't seeing her for what she truly was, a person who had come to him for justice. Judge Mitchell listened intently as Erica outlined her case: the breach of contract, the failure of the vendor to fulfill their side of the deal, and the financial hardship it had caused her company. She spoke clearly, presenting evidence and her reasoning with precision. Her argument was sound and well-structured, but Judge Mitchell's expression remained neutral. He had seen cases like this before, businesses suing over contracts gone wrong, and in his experience these kinds of disputes were often about details, about paperwork not matching up, or some technicality that could easily be dismissed. In his mind, the case was straightforward. There was no need for excessive sympathy or leniency. The law was clear, and as a judge it was his duty to follow it no matter the circumstances. Erica's words echoed in the courtroom, but to Mitchell they felt almost like a blur. He focused on the paperwork, the fine print, the technicalities, but it wasn't the paperwork that caught his attention. It was her. She was sharp, she was fierce, but there was something else about her, something in the way she presented her case that made Mitchell pause for a brief moment. He couldn't place it, but it was enough to make him question his usual approach. The fine had to be imposed. After all, the rules were the rules. But even as he announced his decision to fine Erica, Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Erica felt the weight of his decision settle over her like a heavy cloud. As the judge spoke, his words echoed in her mind. A fine that would set her back when she could least afford it. Despite her composed appearance, her chest tightened as the words left his lips, and she silently vowed that this was not the end of the fight. She wasn't going to let this judgment define her. She had built her company from the ground up, and no amount of bureaucracy was going to take it from her. But as she gathered her things and prepared to leave the courtroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from just another case. It was personal. She had no idea just how personal it was about to become. Erica left the courthouse in a daze, her mind racing as she walked to her car. The fine wasn't just a financial blow. It felt like a personal attack on everything she had worked so hard to build. The weight of it sank into her chest with every step, and for the first time in a long while, doubt crept in. She had been fighting for so long to make her business a success, to prove that she could overcome every obstacle, every stereotype that had been placed in her way. But today felt different. Today, Judge Mitchell's decision felt like a reminder that no matter how far she had come, there would always be someone who would look at her and decide she wasn't enough, someone who didn't understand what it took to get to where she was. She slammed the door of her car shut and sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead at the empty street. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the silence, but even it couldn't calm the storm in her mind. She had been so composed in that courtroom, so sure of herself, yet now she felt small. The fine wasn't the end of it, though. That much was clear. She had to appeal this decision, But how could she, when everything seemed stacked against her? Erica's phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her mood darkening as she saw the name of her assistant, Maya, flashing in front of her. Maya's voice, when she answered, was filled with concern. "Erica, are you okay? I heard what happened in court. That fine. It's crazy. You can't let this slide." "I know, Mia," Erica replied, her voice tight. "But it's not just about the fine. It's everything that led to it. That judge, he didn't see me for who I am. He didn't listen." Mia's voice softened. "I can't believe he did that. He didn't even seem to care about the bigger picture, huh? He just saw a piece of paper, not the story behind it. What are you going to do?" Erica paused, the frustration building up inside her again. "I'm going to fight back, Maya. I can't let this slide. Not for me, and not for anyone else who's been treated this way. This isn't just about me. It's about a system that doesn't care about fairness." As Erica drove home, she started to formulate a plan. She couldn't just let this be another painful chapter in her life. She had to turn it into something that would create real change. She had worked hard for years to get to this point, and one unjust ruling wasn't going to define her. She knew the battle wouldn't be easy, but she also knew this wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about challenging a system that had failed so many before her. Meanwhile, Judge Mitchell went about his day, blissfully unaware of the consequences his decision might have. He was busy reviewing paperwork, preparing for his next cases, and feeling confident that he had upheld the law. He believed he had done the right thing. After all, he followed the rules, didn't he? What he didn't realize was that those rules didn't always account for the human element, the stories behind the cases that he dismissed with a glance, the nuances he overlooked. He was about to learn a painful lesson that would shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew about justice. But Erica wasn't waiting for him to learn. She was already preparing for the fight of her life, and it wasn't just for herself. It was for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or judged unfairly. She had no idea just how close she was to a revelation that would change everything. The man who had fined her, the man who seemed so sure of his authority, was about to face a truth that would shake him to his core. Erica's resolve was stronger than ever. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Weeks passed, but the sting of the fine still lingered. Erica threw herself into her work, determined to push past the setback. But the feeling that something wasn't right gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the image of Judge Mitchell sitting behind his bench, seemingly indifferent to her struggle. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the system, the hidden biases, and the people who made decisions without ever understanding the true impact of their rulings. She couldn't let it slide, not without doing something about it. Then, an unexpected invitation arrived in her inbox. The city's Judicial Review Board was convening for a critical meeting, one aimed at evaluating the fairness and transparency of local courts. The email came as a surprise, but Erica knew exactly what it meant. This was her chance to take action, to push for accountability in a system that had long ignored the very people it was meant to serve. The invitation wasn't just an opportunity to speak up. It was an opportunity to change the narrative. On the day of the meeting, Erica dressed carefully, her sharp suit a reflection of her confidence and determination. As she walked into the conference room, she could already feel the weight of the room's expectations. The faces of lawyers, government officials, and high-ranking judges looked back at her, some skeptical, some curious. She was no stranger to high-pressure situations, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a voice for those who had been silenced for far too long. The room settled, and the meeting began with formalities. Talk of judicial reforms, diversity in the legal field, and creating a fairer system filled the air. But as the conversation continued, something unexpected happened. Judge Mitchell walked into the room. Erica's heart skipped a beat. There he was, the man who had fined her, the man whose decision had thrown her life into turmoil. But he didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. In that setting, surrounded by suits and politicians, she was just another face among many. Erica's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to remain composed. She couldn't let him know just how much his ruling had affected her, not yet. She watched as he took a seat, speaking with colleagues about procedural matters, completely unaware of her presence, or more importantly, who she was. As the meeting unfolded, Erica's mind raced. This was a pivotal moment. Everything in her told her to confront him, to call him out right then and there. But that wasn't the plan, not yet. Instead, she listened carefully to the conversations, each one focusing on different aspects of the judicial system that needed change. It was clear that reforms were necessary, but they lacked direction, and there was little discussion about the hidden biases that ran deep within the courtrooms. Erica could feel a shift in her thoughts. She had come to speak out about one unjust decision, but now she realized she had the power to change more than just her own fate. She could be a catalyst for reform, for real change in the judicial system. Then, as if by fate, the topic shifted to the evaluation of local judges. The board was beginning a comprehensive review of performance, including ethics, judgment consistency, and public interaction. The mention of Judge Mitchell's name caught her attention immediately. She leaned forward, her pulse quickening. There it was, the opening she had been waiting for. Erica's mind raced. She had been invited to this meeting, not just as a participant, but as someone with power. The review of judges' conduct was part of her role on the board, and Judge Mitchell's actions were about to come under scrutiny, whether he knew it or not. But this wasn't just about his ruling against her. It was about the larger issue of bias, of judges who made decisions without truly understanding the human cost behind them. It was about ensuring that the system worked for everyone, not just those with the power to wield it. As the meeting continued, Erica's resolve grew stronger. She would speak up, not just for herself, but for all those who had been overlooked, dismissed, or unfairly judged. The fight was far from over. It was only just beginning. Erica sat back in her chair, absorbing the weight of the conversation around her. Her mind was sharp, calculating, and she felt the growing sense of power inside her, the kind that came not from wealth or status, but from knowledge and authority. She was part of the board now. She had the authority to influence change, to hold people like Judge Mitchell accountable for their actions. And yet, as she watched him, still unaware of her identity or the significance of her presence, a quiet resolve settled over her. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about the system, about justice, about ensuring that no one else had to face the same unfairness she had. The meeting continued, but Erica's thoughts were elsewhere. Judge Mitchell sat a few seats away, actively engaging in the discussions, his voice confident as he spoke on various matters of judicial process. He had no idea what she knew or who she was. To him, Erica was just another member of the board, perhaps another voice in the sea of faces. But what he didn't know was that she had the power to change his life completely. It wasn't just about his ruling on her case anymore. It was about everything he represented. Judge Mitchell, like so many others, operated under the assumption that he was always right, that his decisions were final, without ever considering the wider impact. He had no idea that the woman he had fined, who he had dismissed as just another litigator in his court, was now in a position to disrupt his entire career. It wasn't just a matter of ethics or fairness anymore. It was a matter of power dynamics, of who controlled the narrative, who held the keys to a more just system. Erica took a deep breath. She could feel the anticipation building inside her. Her role on the board gave her the ability to shape the conversation, to push for real change. But this moment, right here, was critical. The next few steps would determine whether she would follow through with a course of action that might change the judicial landscape, or if she would simply take a quieter approach, letting the system continue on its flawed path. In the midst of the discussion, Erica excused herself to step out of the room for a few moments. She needed to collect her thoughts and make a decision. As she walked down the hallway, her mind raced through the possibilities. Should she confront Mitchell directly? Should she go public with her concerns about his decision in her case, making sure the board understood the broader implications of such rulings? Or should she use her position more strategically, working behind the scenes to ensure that systemic change could happen on a broader scale? Her hand gripped the edge of the railing as she leaned over it, looking out at the city skyline below. It felt like the weight of the entire judicial system was resting on her shoulders. She had spent her entire life fighting against odds, against the biases of the world, the discrimination that was so often hidden in plain sight. And now, she was in a unique position to make a difference. A judge had wronged her, yes, but that wasn't all. There were countless others who had been failed by the very system that was meant to protect them. If she could change things, if she could help create a judicial process that wasn't just about rules but about fairness, it would be worth everything. Erica's phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She looked down to see a message from Mia, her assistant. "Everything okay?" The message read. Erica smiled softly. Maya was her grounding force, always pushing her to be more, to more. In that moment, Erica knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let this moment pass by. She would confront Mitchell, not with anger or revenge, but with purpose. She would make him see what she had seen all along, the human element of every case, the lives behind the legal jargon. She had the power now, and she wasn't going to let it go to waste. With a final deep breath, Erica returned to the meeting, her mind made up. This wasn't just about her case, it was about the future, and she was ready to take control of it. Erica stepped back into the meeting room, her heart beating steadily but forcefully. The energy in the room was still focused on judicial reforms, but now she was fully aware of the power she held in her hands. She moved quietly to her seat, eyes scanning the room for Judge Mitchell. He was engaged in a conversation with another board member, and from where she sat, he appeared just as confident as he had been in court weeks ago. His casual demeanor was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. She couldn't help but wonder if he even remembered her face, if he recalled the brief moment when she had stood before him in his courtroom, fighting for justice. Did he ever think about the people behind the cases, the businesses and families struggling under the weight of bureaucratic decisions? Or was she just another file to him, just another number in his daily caseload? As the discussions continued, Erica found herself growing impatient. The board members discussed proposals, suggested reforms, and exchanged statistics. But there was no mention of the biases that had crept into the courtroom. No one spoke about the real-world consequences of decisions like the one Mitchell had made in her case. She could feel the frustration rising in her chest. She was done listening. It was time to speak up. Erica stood, her voice firm as she addressed the room. "Excuse me, I'd like to bring something up," she said, her eyes locking on Judge Mitchell. He paused, turning his attention to her. The room fell quiet as all eyes turned toward her. "Go ahead, Erica," the chairperson said, gesturing for her to continue. Erica felt the weight of the room's gaze, but she held her ground. She cleared her throat, carefully choosing her words. "I think we've been discussing the mechanics of judicial reform, but we've been overlooking something crucial, the biases that influence decisions at every level. I'd like to address a particular issue regarding one of our fellow members." Her words hung in the air like a thick fog. The board members looked around, their curiosity piqued. Mitchell's face remained calm, though there was a slight tightening around his eyes, as if he had an inkling of where this was going. "I'm referring to a ruling that was made by Judge Mitchell," Erica continued, her voice steady, but laced with determination. A ruling that affected my business in a way that I can only describe as unjust. The room grew quieter still, and Erica could feel the tension building. She paused for a moment, taking in the faces around her. Some looked surprised, others confused, and a few seemed uncomfortable. But none of them spoke. The board members, usually quick to offer their thoughts, seemed to be waiting for Mitchell's response. Mitchell's eyes flicked between Erica and the others, his calm demeanor faltering slightly. He straightened in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. "Erica, I don't recall the specifics of your case," he said, his voice controlled. "But I'm sure I followed the law as it was presented to me." Erica nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "You followed the law, Judge Mitchell," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "But the law isn't just about rules and procedures. It's about people. My business, my livelihood, my team. These things don't just fit into the neat categories that the law presents. There's a human element that's often overlooked. You didn't see that. You didn't see me." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the weight of her statement seemed to shift the room. The board members were beginning to understand. This wasn't about a technicality. It wasn't just about a fine. This was about something deeper, something more systemic. Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly, but Erica could see the shift. He hadn't expected this confrontation. He hadn't expected someone to challenge him so directly. For a moment, the room was still, like the calm before a storm. "And I think that's what we need to address," Erica continued, her voice gaining strength. "The biases that guide our decisions, the assumptions we make about those who come before us. We have the power to shape the future of this system, to make it better, fairer, more equitable. But we can't do that if we ignore the truth." Judge Mitchell looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at Erica. For the first time, she saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, though it was barely noticeable. "I see," he said softly, though there was a hint of discomfort in his tone. "I hadn't realized the impact my decision had." Erica didn't let the moment pass without making her point. "It's time we all realized the impact of our decisions, Judge, not just on paper, but on the lives of the people we serve." As the room remained silent, Erica knew that this was just the beginning. She had taken the first step, but there was more work to be done. She wasn't done challenging the system, and she wasn't done making sure that no one else would have to face the same injustice she had. The silence that followed Erica's words felt heavier than the hundreds of courtroom decisions Judge Mitchell had made over the years. It was as though the entire room was collectively holding its breath, waiting for Mitchell's response, or for someone else to speak up, to diffuse the tension. But no one did. They were all too aware of the delicate shift in power that had just occurred. Judge Mitchell cleared his throat and straightened in his seat, his face betraying a rare vulnerability. His usual air of unwavering authority was gone, replaced by a subtle discomfort that he couldn't quite mask. He glanced around the room, but the faces of the board members remained neutral, some looking intently at him, others stealing glances at Erica, sensing the gravity of the moment. I understand your concerns, Erica," Mitchell said slowly, his voice less confident than it had been just moments before. "And I appreciate your perspective. I'll admit, I hadn't fully considered how my ruling might have impacted you, or the broader implications of it. But I'm bound by the law. I can only judge based on what's in front of me." Erica's heart raced, but she didn't let her composure slip. She knew this was the critical juncture, the moment when Mitchell had to either take accountability or double down on his stance. "I understand that the law is your guide, Judge, but what good is a law that doesn't account for the realities of the people it affects?" She replied, her voice calm but firm. "What good is a system that doesn't understand that behind every case, behind every fine, there's a person fighting to survive? The law should be flexible enough to account for the nuances of life, not just the cold letter of rules." The room seemed to tense even further as Erica's words echoed through the space. The board members were now looking at Mitchell, waiting for him to respond in some meaningful way. Some of them had been skeptical of Erica when she first took her seat at the table. They saw her as another ambitious businesswoman with an axe to grind. But now, they were beginning to understand that her fight wasn't just for her business. It was for something much larger. It was a fight for fairness, for equality, for accountability in a system that had often been blind to the struggles of those without power. Mitchell seemed to grapple with the weight of her words. He sat there for a moment, clearly considering his next move. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter but more reflective. "You're right. I haven't always thought about the people behind the cases I rule on. I've been focused on the law, the process, and ensuring that every decision is within the framework that I've been taught to uphold." He paused, looking down at his hands before looking up at Erica. "But that's no excuse for not considering the broader impact of my decisions. I can see now that I've been too focused on procedure and not enough on fairness." For a moment, Erica simply stared at him, trying to read his sincerity. She had expected some form of deflection, some defensive reaction. But this was different. This was the beginning of something, though she wasn't sure where it would lead. She nodded, but her words were resolute. "This isn't just about me, Judge. This isn't about one case or one fine. It's about a system that's broken in so many ways. It's about making sure that judges and lawyers and everyone involved in the process understand that fairness is not a one-size-fits-all concept. It's about acknowledging the real-world consequences of every decision." The room was still. Even the most experienced members of the board, those who had seen it all, were silent, absorbing the weight of Erica's words. For many, it was an uncomfortable truth. They had never truly thought about the people behind the legal jargon, the companies, families, and individuals who were just trying to get by. "I'll take this to heart," Mitchell finally said, his voice low. "I promise you that. I've been too focused on the black and white aspects of the law. I can't undo what's been done, but I can try to do better moving forward." Erica felt a surge of determination. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. She hadn't come here to make a judge apologize. She had come here to change the narrative, to push the conversation toward accountability and fairness. And with this small but significant shift, she knew she was on the right path. The chairperson of the meeting, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Erica, your words have clearly had an impact, and I think it's time we consider ways to ensure that these kinds of discussions become part of our ongoing judicial reviews. We need to address the human side of every case, not just the legalities." The board nodded in agreement, and a sense of quiet resolution spread across the room. For the first time in a long time, it seemed that real change was on the horizon. Mitchell's acknowledgement, though small, was the first step in a much larger transformation. Erica had done what she set out to do. She had made them see. As the meeting continued, Erica couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. This battle was far from over, but it was a victory nonetheless. She had started the process of shifting a deeply ingrained system, and she wasn't stopping now. There was so much more to be done, but for the first time, it felt like the world was beginning to listen. The weeks following the board meeting were a whirlwind. The dust had barely settled after the confrontation with Judge Mitchell, but the effects of that moment rippled outward in ways Erica couldn't have anticipated. News of the meeting and the unexpected confrontation made its way to the local press. The story was framed as a remarkable moment of self-reflection within the judicial system, with Erica's bold challenge to the status quo being hailed as a catalyst for change. The narrative had shifted from one of an individual grievance to a broader call for judicial accountability. But Erica wasn't satisfied with just the headlines. While the media buzzed with commentary about the meeting, she knew that the real work had only just begun. Public acknowledgement was one thing. True systemic change was another. She wasn't in this for the applause or the recognition. She was in it for the long haul, determined to ensure that her experience wasn't an isolated one, that no other business owner, no other citizen, would be blindsided by a ruling that failed to consider the human cost of the law. Behind the scenes, the board had quietly begun implementing changes. They had initiated a series of workshops for judges and legal professionals focused on recognizing biases and understanding the wider social and economic impacts of judicial decisions. The goal wasn't just to review the law, but to shift the culture of the judicial system itself. Erica was invited to participate as a guest speaker in these sessions, a role she never imagined she would play. Standing in front of groups of legal professionals, discussing her journey and the importance of empathy in the courtroom was both humbling and empowering. Judge Mitchell, too, seemed to take her words to heart. He had reached out to Erica several times, not to apologize further, but to discuss concrete ways to make his courtroom more accessible and just. They had met for coffee on several occasions, and while their conversations started on uneasy terms, they eventually found common ground. Mitchell wasn't the enemy Erica had originally seen him as. He was part of the same system she was trying to change, and like so many others, he had simply been unaware of the harm he had caused. One afternoon, after one of their meetings, Mitchell surprised her with a question. "Erica, what if I told you that I've been advocating for changes in the system myself? What if I told you that I don't just want to be a better judge in my courtroom, but I want to change the way the entire court system works?" Erica leaned back, considering his words. "I'd say it's about time, but it's not just about one judge, Mitchell. It's about how many others are out there who don't even recognize their own biases. It's about the people who sit in courtrooms every day, expecting fairness, only to walk away feeling like the system doesn't care about them." Mitchell nodded. "I know that now, but if we're going to make real change, we have to start somewhere. If we start with the judges, if we start with the people who make decisions, maybe we can begin to see some real shift in how things are done." Erica smiled, the tension she'd once felt toward him beginning to fade. "You're right. And it's a start, but it's just that, a start. I want to see the law change. I want to see people's lives considered in every ruling. We need a system that values humanity above procedure." As Mitchell listened, Erica could see the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't perfect, but he was willing to learn, and that was more than she could have asked for. They agreed to work together, combining their respective positions to bring about tangible change. Months passed, and the first signs of transformation started to show. In addition to the judicial workshops, there were community outreach programs where local citizens could voice concerns about the legal system. There was also an emphasis on restorative justice practices, where offenders could be given the chance to make amends without falling through the cracks of an overburdened system. Mitchell had even suggested starting a mentorship program for young lawyers, encouraging them to think critically about the real-world impact of their legal decisions. The work was slow, but it was steady. Erica's business had recovered from the fine, and her involvement in the judicial reform initiatives had given her a renewed sense of purpose. What started as a personal grievance had blossomed into a powerful mission to change the very fabric of the system. And although Erica knew the battle wasn't over, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment in knowing that her actions had sparked something much bigger than herself. In the back of her mind, she knew this was only the beginning. The system wasn't going to change overnight, but she had set something in motion. And as the first seeds of reform took root, Erica couldn't help but feel that her fight, her story, had become part of something much larger than she could have ever imagined. A legacy of change that one day would make the system better for everyone. It had been nearly a year since that pivotal moment in the boardroom, and Erica stood at the edge of the courthouse, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of gold and crimson. She had come full circle, from a small business owner who felt powerless in the face of a flawed system, to an advocate for judicial reform who had become an unlikely symbol of change. The journey had been long and at times excruciatingly slow, but as she looked out over the courthouse steps, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Her work wasn't done, of course. Far from it. Erica knew that systemic change was never an overnight achievement, but the progress was undeniable. The workshops and community outreach programs were flourishing, with more judges, lawyers, and legal professionals recognizing the importance of empathy, fairness, and understanding in their roles. There was a new focus on restorative justice, and the conversation around bias and human impact was no longer confined to academic discussions. It was being acted upon in courtrooms across the city. Erica had continued her work as a guest speaker, sharing her experiences and advocating for those who had been silenced by a system that often treated them as mere statistics. But it wasn't just her voice that was now being heard. It was the voices of those who had been overlooked, marginalized, and ignored for far too long. One of the most rewarding aspects of the reform efforts had been the mentorship program for young lawyers that Judge Mitchell had championed. It was an initiative that focused not just on teaching legal skills, but on fostering empathy, critical thinking, and a deep awareness of the societal impact of legal decisions. Young attorneys were encouraged to meet with people directly affected by the system, the clients, the families, the business owners, to understand the ripple effect of their decisions. Erica had personally mentored several young lawyers, helping them see the law through a different lens and urging them to consider the humanity behind every case. Judge Mitchell, for his part, had become a true ally. He was no longer the distant, aloof figure who had once issued a fine that almost destroyed her business. The change in him was tangible. Mitchell was actively advocating for reform from within the judicial system, using his position to push for greater accountability and fairness. He had publicly apologized for his role in Erica's case, but more importantly, he had used that apology as a springboard for systemic change. He'd become an unexpected ally, a bridge between those inside the system and those fighting for a better, fairer one. Erica had received numerous accolades for her role in this movement, but she remained humble, focused on the cause rather than the recognition. She knew that true change was measured by the long-term impact on people's lives, not by awards or speeches. It was in the stories of the families who no longer feared the courts, in the voices of business owners who no longer felt that the system was stacked against them, and in the lawyers who were beginning to understand the importance of justice over procedure. As she reflected on her journey, Erica thought back to the day she had stood before Judge Mitchell in that courtroom, her hands trembling with frustration, her heart heavy with the weight of a system that had failed her. That moment had sparked something in her, something that had propelled her to not just fight for her business, but to fight for a better system for everyone. Now she had become part of that change. She was no longer the victim of an unjust ruling. She was the architect of a new future. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges to face, but Erica was no longer just a woman with a grievance. She had become a force for transformation, a voice for justice. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final light over the courthouse, Erica knew that her story, her legacy, was just one small part of a much larger movement, a movement that was still growing, still evolving, and still shaping the future of the legal system. She had set the stage for something far beyond herself, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The work wasn't over, but it was well on its way. Erica smiled to herself as she turned away from the courthouse steps. There was still more to be done, but she was ready. After all, the future was never built on what had come before. It was built on what came next, and Erica was just getting started.